Florida State and Clemson to the Big 12 seemed impossible, but now the actual journalists are talking about it. This is Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wild Realignment Week, everybody. I'm Drake Toll from Locked On Big 12, America's #1 Big 12 podcast. Hit subscribe if you're watching on YouTube so I can keep my job. That is Cameron Stewart, the host of the Cam Show through Rogue Media, as well as host of Locked On Baylor. Thanks for making this show your first listen every single day. Today, Florida State and Clemson to the Big 12 is real. And in the middle portion of today's show, we talk about how big of a disaster this is for these two. Can they be any more desperate than they are? And finally, if it's two, it might as well be four. Miami, Louisville, who else comes with this package deal? Jason Scheer tweets, according to sources, there's an internal belief that the Big 12, that Florida State and Clemson are likely to join the conference within the next year or so. Off the riff. What the hell is going on?
Man, beats me.
Yeah.
It was definitely, I took it with a grain of salt at first, Drake, because you know who the first one I saw reporting this was the end of last week?
Me 6 months ago, but that was clickbait.
Sorry. Thank you for admitting that. That's the first step. I appreciate that. Appreciate the question. No, it's Greg Swaim. Greg Swaim was the first one I saw. So I was like, well, if there's anything that's not going to happen, it's going to be these two teams going to the Big 12, because according to Greg Swaim, Scott Drew is coaching Louisville and Kentucky this year. But then it was almost like a news dump thing. Like it just started gaining steam over like Friday and Saturday. And we're in the midst of, everyone's looking at their own recruiting battles. Everyone's looking towards media days. And you're kind of like trying to get situated for the season that's a month and a half away. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, wow, the Big 12 might actually be in on this. Yeah. Not as surprising as it would have been a month ago or so, just because of how this thing is playing out in the ACC. It's just such a mess. And I am the king of analogies that kind of fall flat at the end. So I'm going to deliver one to you and the Big 12 in general. Remember Lonzo Ball when he was getting drafted by the Lakers? My dad made a great point about that before the draft. He said, do the Lakers want Lonzo Ball? Because we hear LeVar say it and that he's only going to play for the Lakers. We haven't heard anything from the Lakers. Now, of course, they did go to pick him, but that's kind of how I feel about this of like Florida State and Clemson. They're going to the SEC. They're leaving. They're ditching the ACC. Broke asses. They're going to the SEC. And then I thought this last week, I said, does the SEC want them? We haven't really heard this. Of course, it makes sense, but we haven't heard it. Or the Big Ten. Again, of course, that would make sense of these giant brands and how conferences are expanding. But no one said, no one's reporting that, oh, yeah, the Big Ten really wants this. The way the SEC was with UT and OU, we haven't really heard that from the other side. So now the Big 12 starts to make sense. They haven't outright said it, so I know that goes against my analogy here. But of course they would want them. Of course they would.
That one's the no-brainer. I was
this closes the gap.
LiAngelo was the third irrelevant brother. He was the Cooper Manning of the deal, I think.
Yeah.
I was his ex-girlfriend's math tutor in college. Pretty lady. Actually, she went from Baylor, ended up going to TCU. So not too dissimilar from yours truly. I kind of a double affiliation with both of those schools. Do you think that Tony Altimore is like the Joe Biden of all of this, and Greg Swaim is like the Donald Trump, where you like
choose your fighter, man?
And if you as a viewer are in the sphere of realignment, you're probably going, yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense.
They're just throwing rocks at each other, and the rocks are hitting each other. It's such a mess.
Then when the rocks are correct, you're like, damn it. They were right. They nailed this one. And you're right. Swaim has been on the forefront of this for a long time. And this show, I've talked about how stupid what Brevin Murphy 2 months ago, I thought he was an idiot when he said, there's an emergency scenario, worst case scenario where Florida State and Clemson go to the Big 12. I was like, why would you even write that? Why would you even put that in print? It's so far impossible. And now, me, the guy who has actually followed this, but not at what point do I actually believe it's a possibility? Today, I guess, has to be that day. Egg on my face that these people who have been talking about this are legit. This is a real thing. To me, before we move on, this says a lot about the Big 12, though. I think this says a lot of good stuff about where Brett Yormark has taken the conference compared to 4 years ago. Yeah,
because, I mean, we sit here and we've had this discussion a few times of, you know, the Big 12 is not part of the Big 2, but it feels like they're way ahead of the ACC. This solidifies that. But we just want to get out of here so bad. We don't even care if we're going to the Big 12. We're just getting out of here. Like that makes this thing more legit. And I think it should open the eyes of the ACC that they knew they were going to lose these schools, right? But now they're like, we're going to lose them to the Big 12? Like, the world's better than us? Yeah. Right now it is, brother. It is.
Good. It's a great middle finger. And we'll get to it at the end of the show, but it makes me think about Washington and Oregon. They were in that conversation. A year ago, we were saying, hey, could these two schools be Big 12 schools? And then, you shoot for the moon, you at least land in the stars. You grabbed Utah, Arizona, right? Could that be the case with Florida State and Clemson? I vividly remember it was 3 or 4 years ago. Craig Smoke, who's my favorite of the hosts on that show, by the way. It just was done, man. The Big 12's done. Like that's it. Conference is done. And how far we've come now that the Big 12 is not only still alive, but could very well have Florida State and Clemson in the conference. Wild to say, but very possible.
It's as real as it's felt. That's all. It's as real as it's felt. And I do come back to that every time we see something like this. Like, we were doing the funeral march for this conference, hoping, praying to God for our sakes down here in Waco that the Pac-12 would stop being so elitist and take a Christian school in. But that was probably a long shot. And now here we are.
America wins. Coming up, these two are as desperate as ever on Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. I went to the oil change place a couple of days ago to get my oil changed, and guess what? They changed my oil, and they said, you, buddy, have a messed up pipe thing. I have a messed up pipe. And I was like, how can I keep piping if my pipe's messed up? They're like, go to eBay Motors. So I went to eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. Right now, 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you need with eBay Guaranteed Fit. It's guaranteed to fit. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. All the prices that you could want, all the parts that you could want. It's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers. Visit eBay Motors and do it today. Cameron Stewart joining Locked On Big 12. Florida State and Clemson, they didn't want to come to the Big 12. This was not the plan. When the first murmurs of these two suing the ACC came out, it was obvious the Big 10, the SEC. There has to be an offer somewhere from a third party on the table, and somebody out there screaming at their car, right, and throwing things like, "Well, there couldn't be an offer." That's what's when it's unscrupulous when you go in and fraud or tampering. Sure, yes, that's the word. Right. The front office of the SEC could not call Florida State and say, "Hey, we want you." That's illegal. But there are third parties who made it very clear, obviously, that these two schools had a landing spot somewhere, so they sued the ACC. Now that landing spot's the Big 12, which is not bad for us, by the way. Florida State playing Baylor in a conference game. This has to be the most desperate these two schools could possibly ever be.
Yeah, we'd have the Big 12 in this scenario would have the two best football programs in Florida, Florida State and UCF. So that would be huge for the brand. And yeah, so it kind of goes against what we were saying a little bit in the last segment, but it rings true in terms of it goes against us saying, the Big 12 is in a great stable spot. It is. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. But again, Florida State and Clemson, if they had their first choice, this likely isn't it. Right. It's the third choice. So that shows you the desperation that they have right now to get out. And I've seen some reports in terms of, this great media deal, which we know the Big 12's got a great media deal, and how that feels like they're on the cutting edge for the next few years. But and that's probably true, but it's still not the Big 10 or the SEC in general.
Correct.
It's just not.
With these two, it still won't be the SEC. Right. But it certainly pushes closer to being the Big 10. We give the Big 10 a whole lot of flowers for having three schools. And you can argue Like Penn State being the third school is just not that crazy. You know, can I say something just wild right now?
Sure. Yes.
Clemson, Penn State, West Virginia. They're all kind of the same school. 14 years ago, it's 2010. Mm-hmm. Would you rather have Clemson or West Virginia in your conference?
Oh, that's a tough one.
It's definitely West Virginia. It's definitely West Virginia. They were a huge expansion candidate, and Clemson made less football revenue than Bowling Green in 2010.
They had some tough years.
They were not good. They were not good. West Virginia was. What this is winning. When you win 2 national championships, as Clemson has done, you take a brand that is on par with Utah or Kansas State.
Utah's another great example. Yeah.
Give them 10 years what Clemson has done for the last decade. And granted, it's tough to take that away. But in the history of college football, no one's ever looked at Clemson and said, I want that. Oh, recruiting hotbed. No, not really. Oh, Clemson, they've got the biggest brand in the state. Nope, they're not the school of the state. This isn't an almighty powerhouse program that so many people have made it out to be.
I mean, yes, you're right. And that the last 10 years have been the saving grace of Clemson's football's history. I know they won a championship in, I think, 1980, but
91, yeah, I think it was 91.
91?
It was like Colorado. It may have been
Colorado.
You finish your, yeah.
So yeah, now I don't know where I was going with it, but that was probably for the best. But all that to say, like,
historically not great. 81.
And I've had these thoughts. I've had these thoughts about West Virginia in terms of a program, and thinking, is the Big 12 just like a step too far for West Virginia? Like in terms of what they're able to accomplish. And I don't know I'm not 100% on that. But I would have the same thought about Clemson in an SEC. Absolutely. Like that's probably just a bridge too far for these guys. At their very best, they could have competed in it, right? I mean, absolutely. They would have been, the main challenger to Alabama, the way Georgia was for years and LSU was for years. And I don't know, though, that I would say they would get over the hump the way Georgia did, or LSU with Burrow. You know what I mean? I don't know that I could say that. So I think from that standpoint, that's not unfair. And look, Clemson has built that brand the last 10 years to where they are sexy to other conferences. But I'm also, let's not kid ourselves in thinking this dynasty is rolling on at Clemson. In fact, I don't think it's going in the right direction. Of those two, the Clemson and Florida State, if I had to pick just one, it's no contest, man. It's Florida State all day long, and they had some really down years when Clemson was winning national championships. But the way Clemson has embraced NIL, you thought Baylor was bad, Baylor was slow with it. Look at Clemson, man. That's going down the wrong side of the highway.
Yeah. It's interesting to me that Clemson, who we've now touted as one of the top expansion schools in America, doesn't do the transfer portal, really. And by the way, has not been winning at a high clip the last couple of years. Like they've gone through a couple of rough seasons, and then they still don't do the portal. And 2, they don't do NIL unless it's God's name, image, and likeness, which I can only think when God heard that, because he hears all, he was like, oh, I gave you NIL to use.
I was going to say, it's like the guy who's drowning, right? I sent you 3 boats. It's like, I sent you all this money. Like, what are you doing, man?
Giving you the opportunity to be rich and prosperous.
Clemson, in terms of how they look in expansion, is really like a luck of the time. I'm not saying they were lucky to get to a dynasty. They got there. But if that was North Carolina instead, we would want North Carolina. We wouldn't want Clemson.
Miami.
Yeah. Even a couple years ago, before the Norvell turnaround, we might have said, I'd really like Florida State too. I know they were 4-8 last year, but I'd really like Florida State. Right. You know what I mean?
But you don't get
Virginia Tech instead of Clemson.
The day that Clemson goes
very similar.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
15 years ago, I want Virginia Tech. That to me is the Clemson deal. It's the year they suck, the year they go 4-8. You look around the room and go, "Do we really need that? Was that really like ooh?" That's what the SEC. If
Virginia Tech's a college football playoff team a few years ago, 5-6 years ago, maybe not even national championship. You're like, I'd really like that.
We're talking expansion
of all those things that you mentioned.
2008, you want Boise State, you want USF, like that's the equivalent of the Cincinnati and the Houston you just brought on.
Yeah,
you want Miami and Virginia Tech, not a Clemson. Coming up, who else comes with these two? We mentioned Virginia Tech. Maybe they're on the table on Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is where I go. I think, oh man, rent's coming up this month. Good thing FanDuel exists, and I can go bet on the Texas Rangers, which sometimes hits now. Used to, it didn't at all, but now they're starting to win. They just won a series against the Astros. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. Head to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Pitcher props, player props, batters, and home runs and hits and all that jazz. FanDuel.com/locked on. Go there today. Given the option, with Florida State and Clemson coming to the conference, the Big 12 goes to 18. To bring 2, 4, 6, I can only assume those won't be the only two in expansion. We usually see these move in 4s. Mm-hmm. Washington State, Oregon State, Miami, Louisville, Virginia Tech. What is the most reasonable option here for the Big 12 to go out and get? And that's where I'll start. Do you toss the first life raft to Washington State and Oregon State?
No.
Oh,
no. I could do without the Pac-2 schools. I just, there is a reason they were left behind. I know we're supposed to be sympathetic as Big 12 people, right, but they really don't. They don't bring you anything. They don't bring you any market. They don't bring you any recruiting, and they don't really bring you any sustained success in revenue sports. So I'm nixing those two right away. The other one that I will controversially nix, but I just can't talk myself into it.
By the way, before everybody just checks out here, Washington State had better viewership than any of the schools that the Big 12 added from the Pac-12. Just want to throw that out there. I mean, it's like a viewership hotbed. It doesn't. I know. It doesn't make a ton of sense. I wouldn't have guessed that. When they got left out, people were like, "Well, they have the flag at College Game Day, so they've got a pretty good brand."
That's true. Like, it's probably British Columbia's favorite team.
But then I'm looking here, and it's like, they beat this guy and that guy. I think Manitoba's more central, right? I think Manitoba's a little more.
Saskatchewan, Manitoba. Yeah, Winnipeg is on the other side, which is in Manitoba, is on the other side of Saskatchewan. So I think Saskatchewan would be next.
Yep, much more central. And that shocked me.
Alberta than Saskatchewan. Yeah.
Blew me away. Then Oregon State's good at football. So those two things bode well for the conference. And if it's from a viability purpose, if Fox tomorrow says, hey, add those guys, then you're going to do it. But if those two are off the table for you, the Pac-2, where do you go? You go east.
All right. Well, I got to nix one more. Here. Then this is potentially controversial. I can't get behind Miami. I get why.
What?
They're obviously more of a market than those two schools that we talked about in the Pacific Northwest. I don't know about the viewership, but more of a market. Great for recruiting, right? Awesome. But you've already got a foothold in Florida. In this scenario, you've got Florida State.
With a much more passionate fan base, by the way. Fan base what? UCF. UCF is above Miami.
Yes. Because that's my point. Miami, I don't think they could give they just don't. They don't care, man. They play in a pro stadium. People don't show up. It's just like Miami pro sports teams. They don't really care. It's pretty transient, and they haven't been Miami in 20 years now. They've had an odd Final Four in basketball, so I'll give them that. But it just does not move the needle for me, Drake.
So, question, front row. Mm-hmm. If Miami is added to the Big Ten or the SEC, how long until they just become Illinois? How long until they're just Iowa? Where you're like,
Iowa's still good. I mean,
they exist here, but I don't really know if they're doing too much to further the conference.
Yeah, they're Illinois, they're Minnesota, they're Maryland.
Minnesota. Yes.
They're just there. They are one of the teams.
Catastrophic move, too. Like, we're going to add Maryland. You'll all see. What?
Dude, I think the Big Ten, if they could right now, would just get rid of Maryland and Rutgers. Just like, You know what? We don't really need New York, DC. Like we've kind of got it covered. Anyway, so I'm not taking Miami either. I am going to stick with a team that is not a part of this ACC discussion.
Boise
Close.
State. Do it.
They are on a better trajectory than Miami.
You just glitched out. We missed the commitment. The camera cut right before the commitment. Yeah, what was your team?
Okay. Nebraska.
Oh,
I am taking Nebraska.
it's not how
now.
I said realistic. This is against the rules.
They're going a better direction than either of those Pac-2 and Miami and a lot of the ACC. I'm buying into Matt Rule again. So I love that. I love their alumni base, NIL collectives. They got a lot of money coming in.
Why would they leave the Big
direction
Ten?
in basketball? Because they can compete in this conference. That's what you tell them. You say you can be here, you can compete. You've got your geographic rivals here. You know, Iowa notwithstanding, but Iowa State and Colorado are here. Come join us. I say Nebraska as my first one. I'm going to get even crazier for the second one.
I'll
stay your Nebraska piece.
Point.
Yeah.
For your Nebraska point. There have been murmurs that because they don't have this AAU status, that the Big Ten is unhappy and they would flip them out and then grab A&M or something. A&M to the Big Ten was a big talk. So if that happens, Nebraska would come to the Big 12 onward.
Okay. My other one's even crazier.
East Carolina. Do it.
Close.
Ooh.
But look, I mean, even as we divulge potentially into three major conferences, that has become the biggest deal in college football, right? NIL, transfer portal, and a conference realignment. I think the Big 12 has been a great landing spot for a lot of schools in a lot of different geographic locations. They have pulled teams from, the Pac-12, the Big East back in the day. They pulled teams from the AAC. They've even pulled an independent there, which I think has been a great landing spot for BYU. And there is some good Christian flair, or I should say church flair, to the Big 12 with Baylor and potentially TCU, depending on how you look at it, BYU. And so we're mixed across the country. So I think the Big 12 has got God and country already. So why not put Notre Dame in there too? Come on.
I thought you were going for Liberty. That setup was like, he's going to say Liberty. He's going to say Liberty on this show.
No,
I had to make the point too that at some point somebody's going to take Liberty. It's inevitable if that happens.
Where are they? What are they in, by the way? That would have been crazier than Notre Dame.
The A10 maybe? Yeah, I think Notre Dame is for money. I would love to add Notre Dame for money.
Notre Dame, they've got to do something at some point, man. Obviously, the Big Ten makes the most sense. They should have been in the Big Ten 50 years ago.
Who knew that describing
come on, man, Big 12.
Billing innuendos to describe a school could get you to Notre Dame or Liberty real quick.
That's great, man. Talk about the rise of Liberty. Ian McCaw.
Massive school, ton of a huge alumni base, a national brand.
Notre Dame ain't that far off, man.
Liberty played for in a New Year's Six Bowl last year, I think, right?
Yeah.
Oregon, they got slammed by Oregon. That's Dan Lanning.
And a winning record against Baylor.
I went to a concert recently and met a pretty lady in the pit who is a club soccer player at East Carolina. So if we added them,
I knew some people from my high school went to East Carolina, high school outside of Boston. So they went there to have a good time.
Pretty ladies?
Yeah, actually. Can you believe it?
Huh. Crazy how those exist. You forget
ECU
sometimes.
and Coastal was a good landing spot for some of the good-looking young co-eds from Rockland, Massachusetts.
Go in there and get an education. More than anything, just to have that ECU diploma hanging on the wall. Coastal Carolina,
Coastal.
Chance up.
Yep, I feel a pulse there. There you go. You're good.
Yep, you're in. Check. Count it. You got a 33 on your ACT. You don't want to come here.
Yeah. Are you sure? Have you looked at all your options?
Liberty's a great
Wake
spot.
Forest, just up the road.
They're smart. Where can people find more of your stuff?
Unfortunately, there is more of my stuff out there. Twitter @RealCamStewart had a great England joke on Sunday. Just putting that out there. Also, the Cam Show on Instagram and YouTube, which is both at the Cam Show through Rogue Media Sports Network. We're talking a lot of sports and then some stuff that isn't sports. So we have a good time.
Subscribe so that I can keep my job, please. This has been and always will be Locked On. I'm a Baylor. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dose Grande.